Hello, welcome to I Know a Guy Bicycles, live, hanging out with a guy. So today we're gonna hang out over a cup of Joe series. This is when I'm gonna, answer some questions, go over a couple little details. If the camera is a little grainy, I do apologize. Hopefully you can hear me fine. Looks like it's recording, but we're gonna go over some bond brackets. Somebody submitted a question yesterday, and we're gonna talk about them. And the question was, I have a square tapered bottom bracket, and I'm switching to a splined bottom bracket, which is the next generation. And is that going to change my spacing of my cranks? Well, I'm going to go into detail with that, a little bit of history lesson here. And yeah, being as old as I am and being in the industry for over 30 years, I got a little bit of insight on this and what was and what is and what's going to be through today to the bottom brackets crank set. So yeah, it's a pretty good question, and it can get really confusing. So let's go back in time. Yeah, playing on Wayne's World. Anyway, back in the 90s, Wayne World was around. They had square tapered bottom bracket. Actually, they had them in the 80s and even before then. And that would replace cotter pins, which you don't want to know about. But the square tapered bottom bracket, what that means is the bottom bracket itself is square and it's tapered. Pretty simple. This is the newer version. The original version, when I started back in '89, they had loose ball bearings and an adjuster cup, and that was just a nightmare. You can take it all apart, clean it, lube it, switch ball bearings and switch it out. And you had all these different spindle lengths and you had all these different cup sets and all this stuff and bits and pieces. And finally, somebody came out with the cartridge system. This was awesome. Reason being is it was all integrated. It's all in one piece. It's all, no adjustment of bearings. And when these goes bad, boop, you get a new one, throw it in there, $40 later, you're good to go. So going to sizing. And yeah, this is where it gets really tricky because back in the day, they had different length sizes here, which you still do today. But they had different length sizes, and it all depended on what frame you're putting it on, what crank set you had, and so forth. And that made it really confusing. And it was all marked, with the model. And I don't know if this one actually doesn't have the size, just the model. So it's BB-UN71. This is more of a little bit higher end one. So when you're looking at sizes, it's all metric, of course. So, this one was, you'd have to get out your measurement tool. This is, I think it's a 112 or 113, somewhere around there, has in length. And then you'd have also the BB size, and this would fit a 68. And so it's 68 to 115, and you got all these matrices I'm trying to figure out. I couldn't tell you how many times back in the early 90s I've swapped out so many bottom brackets to get that chain line correct for the crank set. That fits this crank set, which is the square taper crank set. So square taper, cold cold contact and crushed on there. So, that's how it worked. The end crank pullers are pulled off, that kind of deal. So you got square and square. Okay, so yeah, you would have different spacings of your chain rings and crank sets and all that. Horrible mess. So, reverting back to the question, the gentleman that sent me emails like, I'm going from this to this. Is this going to change my spacing? Well, this is the next revelation of bike parts. Fast forward to the late 90s. They went to the spline system. The spline system, instead of having this square tapered, which was problematic because if this guy loosened up, it started bubbling these out and you would not have a good contact. We were in a point where we would take pop can shims and shim them in there to get the crank set in there. Ugly mess. Spline, you don't have that problem because it's just contacted with all these different spline pieces. Still the cartridge concept, but they also realized let's kind of give this a little more standardization so it's less confusing and not so many SKUs, parts that we have to produce. So with looking at all those, then they started stamping them. This is a BB 5500, which is 68 shell. That's the size of the bottom bracket that's going to fit into, which is most road bikes. And this is the length is the 118.5. And a 118.5 versus the 115, 13, 15, all those other size. I think it was a 113, it's the other size. So there's really just two sizes that went with Shimano, because the 118 went with the triple and the 113 went with the double. So that automatically took care of your spacing and chain line. So that's where it's like you don't have to get different sizes of these to adjust this. It's already been predetermined by the manufacturer. This is going to fit a 68 shell. This is the 118 spacing. This is the crankset here. And the manufacturers made their frames to specify to this part versus vice versa. So it was kind of like one of those things. They had too many choices, which was a hairball mess, to more standardizations, which is awesome. So to answer the question, you don't need to worry about it as much, because the 118 for a triple, it's going to fit that. And now, instead of trying to figure out what bottom bracket goes to the bike to fit the crankset, you figure out what crank that you want to use, look at the specifications. It will have a bottom bracket as an aftermarket to sell or be sold with to fit that bottom bracket and bike. So it's kind of flipped the concept from the bottom bracket point of view to the crankset view. So it's like, I want to put these triples on these bikes. It comes with this bottom bracket. That's what goes with it, or you buy it separately. The other thing I do need to mention, there's another brand out there. It's worst name ever because it can become bad, but it's called ISIS. It's more of a deeper spline system. Same concept, just not Shimano. So another company, FSA, a couple other brands, Truveta is another one that made a lot of these, and they're just like their way of getting around the patent of spline and made their own version of spline. Same concept, bottom bracket, sizing, and so forth. So you got the spline system, and now the old taper. So you're talking about, this covers the range from late 80s or 80s, 90s to late 90s to early 2000s, where the old Tiger 105 cranks look like this. They were spline. And also they did the hollow thing on here, I believe. Yeah. I remember going to a Shimano clinic back in the 90s, late 90s, and they'd have these set up and you could stand on them and see the flex versus this version. This one had more of a flex and this one was really stiff. So that was kind of like their little demonstration of like, you really lightened it up and made it stiff. So yeah, these are, if I still remember correctly, these are hollow inside. There's like a hollow bubble inside there, which is kind of cool when they were making the process. These are still very relevant to today. It's a triple or double. You can still find the used ones of these. I do come across these. Most of the bikes I've been, refurbish have this kind of range of componentry on them. So they're tested, tried and true. When they went to this, it was a game changer. They kept it for several years before they changed it to the next one, which I'll show you here in a second. That was just awesome. They hold up. And even today, if you're looking for an entry-level road bike, you don't want to spend over $1,000, and you find a bike that has this guy in it, go for it. I mean, these hold up really well. Thousands of miles still left on them if they're in still good condition, that kind of thing. So now we're fast forwarding to the mid 2000s up to closer to current today. It's the through axle kind of thing, crankset. So same concept here. You get the crank, then your bottom bracket retrofits to whatever frame you have. And what's really cool about when these are usually sold as a set, and they're sold as a set with spacers in the middle of these on some of them. On the newer ones, they have spacers. So it will accommodate the 2 or 3 different bottom bracket shell size. And what's cool about this is, well, it's lightweight versus this guy. So it's like a third of the weight. So you got rid of that. Granted, you still have to consider this piece as a weight factor. But it's really easy. These are just sealed bearing guys. They thread in. Obviously, you need special tools for them. But this really just, it's another game changer. So instead of worrying about adjusting this and so forth, this guy just slides through here when it's on the frame, like so. Then you slide your other crank arm on there. Then you have a little adjuster cap that threads in here that tightens it up. And once it's tight, this little plastic tab here is able to pop it down. That locks, there's a little hole in there that holds it in place. That means you're in far enough, it's tight enough. Then you just tighten these down to, what is it, like 10 Newton meters, 10 to 15 Newton meters on the crank bolts here. And you're good to go. That's it. It's super easy. And when you take it off, I need that tool to pop it out. It slides off, which actually, this little guy, this one tightens it with the cap on there, and this has a little hook on it, which is the exact same size to pop that little spacer out. Like so. That's popped out. So if you have a crankset, you find a bike and you get a bike or your bike, and this thing's still popped up and it's not pushed in, that means it's not in there all the way. I'll have to finagle this to. It's really kind of hard when it's not on the bike. So we'll get to that later. But there you go. Bonder brackets and cranksets. Several years iteration between them. All for the better, lightweight. This uses also that hollow tech kind of technology that Shimano made and copyrighted. It's just hollow in there. It's a little bit lighter weight, stiffer. There's also, there's less pivoting in there or chance for pivot. It's a stiffer unit to the newer one, and the bearings are pretty inexpensive to replace and easy to replace versus you going back in time. Late 80s, early 2000s, the cranks here, cartridge system as well. But then you have 3 pieces to work with, kind of deal. And you know, putting these on and off sometimes is problematic. You know, you get them in there wrong, and they'll chew up the aluminum inside, that kind of deal. And then you go old school, which is the I still have little nightmares about these, because they would have spacing issues. Even within the chain rings themselves, they would have spacing issues. These were more standardized, so it kind of cleared up. And really going back in time, Biopace. This is, the original Biopace. To see how it's not round, it's oval. I am cracking up because this has come back. 30 years later, 20 years later, 25 to 30 years later, oval is back in style for your single speed mountain bike guys. I mean, does it really work? Probably does, but their idea on this back in the day is to kill that dead spot in your pedal stroke, if there was a dead spot. I don't know. It's just funny. Anyway, that's the old school nightmares. And yeah, the spacing tapers between these were all different. I think these were even different. So it's one of those things where the old taper style, if you've got that old of a bike, it's going to be kind of tricky to get the right one. You can still find these somewhere on the internet, but the splines are a little more readily available to retrofit these guys. And, you know, they hold up and last a long time. So, hey, hanging out with a cup of Joe, talking about cranks and cranksets, a little bit of history lesson. So that's what I got. And hopefully that answered that question for the guys up north in Canada. I appreciate you reaching out and giving me a question. Yeah, you know, there's been things over the years that changed, and a lot of the newer people don't even remember what those were. I'm sure there's still resources everywhere. But yeah, to get a little bit of insight of what I'm dealing with and what I work on. And when I take these things apart, I'm also inspecting the chain rings themselves, making sure the teeth are still intact. It's all tight. Also the smoothness of the bottom brackets, make sure they're good. And when you pop these out, sometimes you'll see a nasty little mess of drops and stuff. The weirdest thing I found on the bottom bracket was a bee. It was dead, but it was a bee. Kind of like pull it out and like, oh, weird. Poor bee got stuck in there and went down the down tube somehow and got stuck in the frame, and that's where he resides. So anyway, thank you for hanging out with me over a cup of Joe. And until next time, if you have any questions, ping them. Send me to, you also can go to my website, anotherguybicycle.com. You can get me through there too. You can check out the bikes I've worked on and have listed and ready to go. please subscribe to my channel. See more videos like this, as well as other tidbits and so forth. Keep you, it's entertaining to someone apparently. So anyway, I enjoy doing these and hanging out and chatting. And yeah, thank you for your time. And until next time, from the garage.